You are a fool, Bilbo Baggins, and you made a great mess of that business with the stone. And there was a battle, in spite of all your efforts to buy peace and quiet. But I suppose you can hardly be blamed for all that. Previously, on And You Thought It Was Safe. But like Yoda said, there is another. Another trilogy of Middle-earth-centric films that I've left half-reviewed for years, for no good reason apart from sheer laziness. No good reason, but plenty of crappy ones, both personal and professional. And some that straddle the line between the two in the least fun way anything can straddle anything. Honestly, the fandom-rending controversies of 2014 seem so stupid now. Future geek historians are going to consider every single one of us idiots, and they'll have ample evidence to support their case. If there's a Lord of the Rings forum on the internet that escaped the great Hobbit flame wars, I haven't found it yet. Even I got caught up in the spirit of the times, and my old reviews testify to that. I was pissed, and in my anger, I laid all the blame at the feet of writer-director Peter Jackson. Consider this a belated apology. Sorry, Pete. There's a reason I don't do these the weekend after they come out anymore. You gotta understand, though, some of us have been with Jackson since we found Bad Taste in a neglected corner of our local video store, back when such things still existed. We placed our faith in him, and for the 3 horrible years that began this horrible century, our faith was more or less rewarded. But our naive faith required some necessary illusions. Chief among them, the illusion that making $3 billion movies in a row would actually get you some pull with the Hollywood studio suits. In reality, they don't give much of a fuck about anything beyond how to turn movies into high-yield derivative investments. It doesn't matter how successful you are, or how often you prove you know how to make a good movie. They will sabotage and undermine your efforts at every turn, out of the insane delusion that they know better than you do. After all, they have an office and a salary, and what do you have? Beyond an encyclopedic knowledge gained through a lifetime of actually watching movies. Please. You know there's an algorithm for that, don't you? Oh, there's an algorithm for everything these days, and they have much more say in how a movie will finally turn out than any individual writer, director, or producer. Time was you could avoid this trap by, say, having the producer be your best friend, or hell, even your wife. But even that's no longer any guarantee. As evidence, I submit People's Exhibit A, the latter-day career of Peter Jackson. He didn't want to do these Hobbit movies, and I don't blame him. After 5 years eating, sleeping, and shitting Middle-earth, you'd get sick of it too. Hell, we're only 2 1/4 reviews in, and I'm getting pretty tired myself. Sometimes I think no one wanted to make these movies, apart from a few suits inside New Line Cinema and Warner Brothers, which merged in 2008 after no one went to see The Golden Compass in a flagrant failure of Hollywood algorithms. That one was not our fault. Market research clearly showed the books had massive penetration in all the target demographics. Save it. We'll get there eventually, and then you can unleash a righteous rant. So New Line, the house that Freddy Krueger built, became an official subsidiary of the WB, and Tolkien adaptations became the only thing they really had to bring to the table, especially after the Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street remakes failed to make anyone care about Jason or Freddy again. Except for Mortal Kombat fans, but we're easy. We'll crawl through hell just for the slightest bit of fan service. Gotta make another Annihilation before you really piss us off. We were supposed to start seeing Hobbit movies in 2011, and they were supposed to be Guillermo del Toro's Hobbit movies too. Despite del Toro being an on-record hater of the by-now traditional sword and sorcery type of fantasy, one look at Pan's Labyrinth should tell you del Toro's into a much older fantasy tradition. One that Disney began to stamp out in the 30s by taking all the Grimm out of Grimm's fairy tales, back when The Hobbit was just some children's book by a weird Oxford professor with 3 letters instead of a first name. But then, in 2010, MGM went bankrupt. Yes, the same bankruptcy that made James Bond go on a 4-year hiatus, and kept us all from seeing Cabin in the Woods, 2 years after it was done. Del Toro got sick of all the delays, and went off to make Pacific Rim instead. He left Jackson and company holding the bag, and that's apparently where all the fun really began. What was to be one film, with maybe a supplementary sequel meant to bridge the gap between this and Fellowship, became 2 films. And as the second film neared completion, the order came down from on high. Make a trilogy. And why does every single fucking thing have to be a trilogy these days? Because we ran out of Harry Potter books years ago. If their author had just kept writing them, none of this would have had to happen. There would have been no need to make more Batman films, or your beloved Man of Steel, or that Green Lantern film that so pained you all those years ago. Yes. God, why'd you have to remind me that exists? No need to revitalize the Mad Max franchise, or make that Lego movie you still refuse to see. Think about it. All the divisive controversies your little clique has stewed over lo these many years could have been avoided, and you might still be able to convince yourself you have something in common with these people. No, I'm pretty sure Age of Ultron and Fant Four-Stick would have done that anyway. Pessimist. Damn straight. I finally have not 1, not 2, but 3 live-action Hobbit movies, and I can't sign off on any of them. Not even this one, which I sometimes like the best. It's a real toss-up. Desolation of Smaug is where you get all the character development. But Battle of the Five Armies is where everything ends. So every time I get to the end credits, I can make like a store manager in Silent Night, Deadly Night. It's over! Time to get shit-faced! To recap, Unexpected Journey is a fairly faithful adaptation of The Hobbit's first 6 chapters. Desolation of Smaug covers, and greatly expands upon, chapters 6 through 15. The last 6 chapters of The Hobbit are some of the shortest and lightest stuff Tolkien ever wrote in his life, because that's when the camera finally pulls back. The old man telling a fairy tale to kids tone that characterizes the rest of the book begins to yield to a more formal, almost high medieval style of prose. The style that would serve Tolkien so well later on when he finally got to the end of Lord of the Rings. The polite and rather old-fashioned language of such occasions, as he puts it on page 279 of my copy. Such occasions being massive battles between armies of fantastical creatures. That's all chapter 17 of The Hobbit really is. And so, thus, it became the entire back half of Battle of the Five Armies, so you can't accuse anybody of false advertising. Most accuse this trilogy of doing exactly what Tolkien's son and posthumous editor Christopher accused the original trilogy of doing. Quote, they gutted the book, making an action film for 15 to 25-year-olds. And it seems like The Hobbit will be the same kind of film. Unquote. Also seems like there's a little elf blood in the Tolkien family mixed drink, because they're clearly born with the gift of prophecy. Problem is, Christopher Tolkien's an archivist, not a critic, so he makes the amateur critic mistake of using name of a genre I don't like as a synonym for bad. Hell, I did it plenty myself back in my younger years, so feel free to troll through my archives for evidence of my rank hypocrisy. Ooh. May Eru save you from actual action films made for 15 to 25-year-olds, Tolkien's son. Come to my place sometime. We could work through the Fast and the Furious franchise. And I can ask you, do you want those 15 to 25-year-olds to have at least some sense of your father's life's work? Or do you want them watching this crap until the entire cast dies in ironic auto accidents? You might correctly say that's a bullshit false choice. But I would say to you, yes, that's the kind of world we're dealing with out here. It's a bullshit choice of evils all the way up and all the way down. Still, this is the most obvious action movie Peter Jackson's ever made in his life. Its back half is one near-continuous action scene, as long as most full-length features. And yet, even in its extended form, this is the shortest of Jackson's Hobbit films. Almost like it was cobbled together at the last possible minute. But it's still a grueling watch. full of gratuitous amounts of fake tension and more CGI composite shots than you can shake an elvish spear at. And yet, in spite of all that, I can't help but love parts of it, as I love parts of all 3 Hobbit films. They shouldn't exist, but they do. And like a certain other prequel trilogy that drove people insane in its time, they are never, ever, ever going away. Like Bard says after the destruction of Lake Town, we must salvage what we can. Besides, any movie that starts off with a good old-fashioned dragon slaying is going to immediately win points from me, as is any film that features dwarven cavalry charges, elven phalanx formations, and negative Gladriel. And with so much on offer, there is a lot to salvage here, especially now that we have the extended editions, or the whole damn movie editions, as I like to call them. I know they're supposed to make us feel better for being rich enough to afford them, but nothing makes a paying theater-goer feel more cheated than the creeping sensation in the back of your head that there's an extended edition in the pipeline. If you're already going to mutate The Hobbit into a 9-hour-long monstrosity, what the fuck kind of purpose is served by cutting out half of the subplots you've inserted? What, just so you can make it an 8-hour monstrosity instead? Well, actually, yes. We do have a system in place. We have figured out with mathematical certainty how many times to show each film in each theater per day. Or did you think these things made $1 billion based on their quality? Oh no, I've got no delusions about that anymore. But to actually start sounding positive, I must say, much as some of us like to make fun of his name, Benedict Cumberbatch makes a great dragon. If I ruled the world, I'd make him and Billy Connolly fight over Battle of the Five Armies MVP award. The dwarves in these films have always danced around being Scottish, and it's nice to see someone finally just go with it. To the point where I am now waiting with bated breath, just for the chance to call somebody a faithless woodland sprite. Let's see, what else? Ooh, I like Thorin's little psychotic break in his now gold-encrusted Gallery of Kings. More for its metaphor than for its presentation. Because isn't it funny that a story juxtaposing simple country squire living with the corrupting power of greed was itself corrupted by the greed of its own corporate masters? I think so. Richard Armitage still leaves me going, meh. But then again, he's not here for me. He's here for my mom's demographic. Aragorn's only about 20 years old at this point in the timeline. And we need a shaggy-looking once-and-future king around here. Some ladies and gentlemen of a certain persuasion just aren't into the elves. I also like how it seems you can get away with as many decapitations as you want and still get yourself a PG-13. As long as they're orc decapitations, and as long as you're a Christmas-time tentpole movie from one of the big 6 studios. Hell, have a sextuple decapitation. The MPAA understands. Warner Brothers CEO Kevin Tsujihara needs a new boat. And a new summer home to hide out from the peasantry as he plans more layoffs. I really don't know how to end this, but then again, Tolkien didn't really know how to end the book either. Bilbo was supposed to slay the dragon in the original draft, which is of course why so many of his heroic descendants slay the dragon in their own narratives. But by the time he got to the part where the dwarves are imprisoned in Thranduil's dungeons, Tolkien realized that would be pretty fucking ridiculous. So he created Bard, and the Arkenstone, and the concept of dragon madness, and all the other narrative threads these movies bombarded us with every chance they got, as soon as they started up, to the annoyance of hardcore fans everywhere. Because otherwise they'd just pop up here in the third. No good reason to hammer them home as hard as these movies do, but then again, there's no good reason for all this Legolas fan service either. Initially, the people of Lake Town were meant as little more than another obstacle on our hero's journey to the mountain. Greedy-ass human antagonists to go with greedy-ass elf and orc antagonists. But through Bard and his dragon slaying, Tolkien realized the people of Lake Town were themselves in need of a good homeland reclaiming. And suddenly, the third act of this book resolved itself into something other than the cut-and-dried good versus evil thing it was going to be. It acquired nuance and moral ambiguity, and all the other things large-scale conflicts tend to throw off. Elvish and dwarfish animosity was already present in Tolkien's mythology since long before he conceived The Hobbit. And in the book, the orcs struck at Erebor to avenge the killing of their king under the Misty Mountains. So that's 4 armies right there, and the Eagles make 5. And this, by the way, is the reason the Eagles don't just land in Bag End, pick up Frodo, and then take him to Mordor via the really scenic route. I thought asinine re-examinations of this quote-unquote plot hole, which people have been picking over since about 1955, but no, go ahead. I'm sure you have tons of original and creative thoughts on the subject. Would stop as soon as this came out, but no dice. Tolkien knew they were a deus ex machina almost as soon as he came up with them, and he would despair to hear people crying out for him to use them more. There is the tiny little matter of the fact that every time Gandalf the Grey comes asking them for a favor, it usually involves leaving the safety of the skies and the mountains and coming down here with the rest of us terrestrials to really get your claws dirty and maybe wind up dead. Besides, and this is getting really esoteric, but I don't give a fuck, who do you think killed all the other dragons, Think it was all a bunch of hardworking single dads with photogenic kids? It ain't about the fucking Eagles, man. It's about Beowulf. A king dying on a field of battle with only his faithful friend and squire there to hear his last words. Tolkien loved him some Beowulf. And at least Battle of the 5 Armies gets that part right. Which is also why it's my favorite Hobbit movie. Even though it shouldn't exist. That's not saying much. Maybe not, but it's over. Time to get shit-faced. No, it isn't. You have work to do. Besides, I see your mind. This was all an elaborate ruse, wasn't it? You throw shade at Warner Brothers before you praise some of their least popular decisions in years. All part of some elaborate ploy to avoid some imaginary charge of bias. Do you know what your problem really is? My abundance of incredibly expensive bad habits? You actually want to be liked, when really, all you should want is to be rich. Like everyone does. I used to. My Midwestern upbringing led me to believe it was a necessary first step in getting people to pay attention to what I had to say. But I realize now nobody actually listens to anyone anymore. And really, it's no surprise we've all split into these hostile, cliquish little micro subcultures that are constantly exchanging sniper fire with each other. In a way, it's kind of freeing because it reduces every single question down to, is my team winning? And is that other team of losers over there losing? Because I just can't get it up the same way if somebody's not losing somewhere. What are you even talking about? Batman. And Superman. Obviously. Ah, yes.